In the spring of 1940, the most powerful army in the world was the French. They had more tanks than Germany. Many were individually superior, thicker armor, bigger guns. They had the Maginot Line, the most elaborate defensive fortification in human history. They had British allies, time, position, and numbers. In 6 weeks, they were gone. France fell not because Germany had better soldiers, but because Germany had thought differently about its weapons, how they moved, how they communicated, how they concentrated force at a single point before the enemy could respond. The weapons themselves were often remarkable, but it was the philosophy behind them that changed warfare forever. The word Panzer simply means armor in German. By 1940, it had become something more, a shorthand for an entirely new idea about how armored vehicles should fight. The early German tanks were not impressive machines. The Panzer Y carried only machine guns. The Panzer II's 20mm cannon could barely threaten most Allied armor. French tanks like the Char B1 were individually far more formidable. What Germany had instead was a system, and the man who built that system was General Heinz Guderian. Lean, intense, 51 years old, with close-cropped gray hair and the restless energy of a man who had spent 20 years arguing with superior officers who refused to listen, Guderian had developed a doctrine called Bewegungskrieg, war of movement. Tanks should not be distributed among infantry as mobile artillery. They should be concentrated in massive formations, thrusting deep into enemy territory, bypassing strongpoints, collapsing command structures from behind before the enemy could organize a coherent defense, move faster than the enemy could think. By the time Germany turned east toward the Soviet Union in 1941, a new generation had arrived. The Panzer IV, with its long-barreled 75mm gun, became the armored workhorse, versatile and reliable. Then came the Panther, born from the shock of encountering the Soviet T-34, a tank the Germans had not expected and initially could not stop. The Panther had sloped armor copied directly from the T-34's design, a high-velocity 75mm gun of remarkable accuracy, and a silhouette many historians regard as the finest overall tank design of the war. And then there was the Tiger. The first time American tankers encountered the Tiger I in Tunisia in early 1943, the reports were so alarming that senior officers initially dismissed them as exaggeration. They were not exaggerating. The Tiger I weighed 54 tons, carried armor up to 100mm thick on its front face, and was armed with the legendary 80mm gun, already proven capable of destroying any tank on Earth. The combination was devastating. At Villers-Bocage in Normandy on June 13, 1944, SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann, 30 years old, sandy-haired, quiet-spoken, a farmer's son from Bavaria, drove his single Tiger into a column of British armor and destroyed over a dozen tanks and scores of other vehicles in roughly 15 minutes. The Tiger's weaknesses were real: slow, mechanically unreliable, enormously expensive. Only 347 were ever built, compared to over 57,000 American Sherman tanks. But the psychological effect was disproportionate to the numbers. Allied tank crews developed what historians called Tiger phobia, the tendency to report any German tank as a Tiger. The fear the machine generated was a weapon in itself. The Panzer did not fight alone. Above every armored thrust flew a weapon designed specifically to extend the tank's reach into the third dimension. The Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber was ungainly on the ground, but transformed in a dive. Fitted with Jericho trumpets, wind-driven sirens mounted on the undercarriage legs, the Stuka produced a rising banshee wail as it plunged that had been specifically engineered to cause panic. The sound was not incidental. It was a weapon. Above the Stuka flew the Messerschmitt Bf 109, arguably the finest fighter aircraft in the world at the war's start, a narrow, powerful, vicious machine refined through combat in the Spanish Civil War. In the hands of pilots like Erich Hartmann, a blonde, blue-eyed 19-year-old who became the highest-scoring fighter ace in the history of aerial warfare, the Bf 109 was master of European skies until well into 1942. By 1943, Germany was losing. Into this desperation stepped a category of weapons Hitler called Wunderwaffen, wonder weapons. The V-1 flying bomb was the world's first operational cruise missile, a small, stubby-winged aircraft powered by a pulse jet engine. But the V-1 could be shot down. The V-2 could not. The Aggregate 4, designated V-2, was the world's first ballistic missile, developed at the secret research facility at Peenemünde by a team led by Wernher von Braun. Beneath the Atlantic Ocean, a different German weapon came closer than any other to actually winning the war. Admiral Karl Donitz developed a tactic called Rudeltaktik, Wolf Pack. Multiple U-boats would shadow a convoy and attack simultaneously. Between 1940 and 1943, the Wolf Packs nearly severed Britain's Atlantic lifeline. Churchill later wrote that the U-boat campaign was the one thing that genuinely frightened him throughout the entire war. Of the approximately 40,000 men who served in U-boats, nearly 28,000, 70%, did not survive. Germany's weapons were extraordinary. The Tiger tank, the V-2 rocket, the Wolf Pack, each represented a genuine leap in military technology that reshaped how warfare was understood. The engineers who built them were among the most talented of the 20th century. And yet Germany lost, decisively and completely. The weapons could not compensate for the strategic miscalculations of a leadership that attacked the Soviet Union without adequate preparation, declared war on the United States without necessity, and allocated resources according to ideology rather than military logic. The Tiger was built in hundreds, the Sherman in tens of thousands. The V-2 consumed resources that might have produced thousands of conventional aircraft. The U-boats won battles across the Atlantic and lost the campaign beneath it. What Germany's weapons ultimately teach is not a lesson about technology. It is a lesson about the relationship between brilliant instruments and the systems, political, economic, moral, within which those instruments must operate. A wonder weapon in the hands of a failing state is still a weapon of a failing state. The rockets reached the moon. The tanks rusted in fields from Normandy to the Volga. The U-boats lie on the Atlantic floor, most without grave markers, the men inside still sealed in the hulls where they died. The wonder in the end was not the weapons. It was that anyone ever believed weapons alone could be enough.